I'd like to introduce Mr. John Lynch. John is a member of the Cwmrc War Memorial Committee and is also a member of the Royal Australian Navy and served in one of the little-known conflicts in the 1950s, the Malayan Emergency, and it also ran through what was leading up to the confrontation with Indonesia. So John, welcome to the video memorial.
Thank you, Kevin.
Again, a lot of people have heard of Korea, they've heard of World War II, they've heard of Vietnam and things like that. Very few people have heard of the Malayan Emergency. You were a young bloke. What did you know you were going off to?
Well, we knew in those days there was a communist threat coming down through the peninsula. That's about all I knew until I actually joined the Navy and got involved in being posted into that area. And then we were briefed generally what was going on.
So you didn't know, have much of an idea of what was happening in that theatre at all?
Well, that's true, although later on, obviously, I've learned, etc. Yeah.
I think that was the thing about within Australia, so few people knew about it and what was happening. And how old were you when you went into the Navy?
I was 17. I left school and couldn't make up my mind, or college actually, couldn't make up my mind like most youngsters. Tried shearing, wool classing for a couple of months, then decided I'd become an underwriter. Then one day walking around town in Melbourne, I walked past a recruiting school, a recruiting shop. Anyhow, my father had been in the Second World War in the RAF, so I went to go and join the Air Force. I was too young. So I went next door and joined the Navy. As simple as that.
Had you talked it over with your parents beforehand?
No, I think I'd always had an interest in going into the service because of my father. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold.
That's okay.
And I'd always been interested in aircraft. And ironically, when I joined the Navy, I ended up in aircraft as well. But I probably would have gone into the RAF if I had been 3 or 4 months older.
So you went home, you said to Mum and Dad, I've joined the Navy.
Yeah, shock horror.
First reactions?
Shock horror. Oh, all right. And Mum said, I can remember Mum saying, well, I'm not going to see very much of you, am I? And she was right too.
So where did you do your training?
We started off down in Cwmrc down at Haynes Inlet down south of Melbourne. We did our basic left, right and who to salute and who not to salute. Then we went to the trade school and they decided which particular category you'd go to. I selected electrics, and there were 4 sub-branches of electrics: aircraft radio, ship's radio, aircraft electrics and ship's electrics. I got up in the top 4 in the aircraft radio, but it was 2 years before I'd go to sea, and Korea was on at the time, so I was interested in going to Korea. So I did a swap, and I became an aircraft electrician, and I stayed in that industry for 60 years.
It's amazing how when you're young, and a lot of young, and this video is going to be looked at by young people at school and things like that, but things you tend to think of at that point in your life, some of the decisions you make, as you say, 60 years later, it opened a whole new world for you.
Gave me a great career.
Yeah. A lot of people join the Navy to see the world. Did you see the world?
I saw the world. I was, after we did our initial training down in Cwmrc, we went to Narimba, just south of west of Brisbane. No, sorry, Sydney. And we finished off our major training there. Then I was sent to England. So, very nice. I got on the HMAS Vengeance on the paying off trip, all up through the Suez and into Naples and all those exotic places. We were in England for 9 months and did the work up on the 808 Squadron, which was the first Australian all-weather jet squadron. I've been involved with jets all my life. We stayed there for 9 months, came back on the HMAS Melbourne, which was just been commissioned. Then we did a bit of training back here in Australia, up past Stradbroke Island. Then we ended up going up to Malaya.
So when you went to England, how old were you then?
19 or 20. It's quite young.
It's amazing. And I've known people who've been in the Navy and said, oh yeah, we're going to travel the world, and they never left Australia. Yeah. And you look at 19 and you've been over there.
Yeah.
The first squadron of jets, because again, people forget, up at that point, everything was piston motor engines.
True.
And so you were in the first jets being flown by the Royal Australian Navy.
Yes, that's true. The Air Force had jets themselves, but ours was the first all-weather ones. But they were the first for the Australian Navy. We had Fireflies before that and Sea Furies, which we used up in Korea. And we're still operational on back here in Australia. But we went all jet. We had Gannets, ferry Gannets on board, which were a reconnaissance aircraft. The only piston thing we had was the poor old Sycamore helicopter. which was a search and rescue aircraft, and we used to operate.
Because with carriers, it was always my understanding that the helicopters on that were for planes that are ditched.
That's correct.
Search
Yeah.
and rescue
Yeah.
on that. Did you ever see aircraft have to ditch at sea?
Yes. Oh no, I've seen crashes, but not a ditching.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
So you've seen crashes at sea. You've
Yeah.
seen the search and rescue process in operation.
Yes, all boats away, aircraft crash and away, the helicopters all zooming out, and then the destroyer cuts across, and then down go the whaler boats and the cutters, I should say, to go and
Yeah.
do what they can.
So on the carrier, what was your job?
Well, I was on the flight deck with the squadrons when we used to operate. As being an aircraft electrician, I had 2 aircraft I was assigned to. And when we knew we were operational, we'd obviously do all the inspections in the hangar, bring the aircraft up, line them up. And it's very noisy on the aircraft flight deck, unbelievably noisy, with jet engines. In those days, half of us didn't have earmuffs. And we used to get them up there, get them fuelled, then we get them up to the line, the aircraft start the engines. Then we start putting connecting up the guns and the rockets. The guns and the rockets had been fitted. Then the electrician used to climb up on the wing, go up and connect them. And the pilot sitting there with his hands in his head, making sure he'd keep his hands off the triggers. And we used to stand by. Then they'd move it up to the catapult. And prior to that, you'd be standing along. The pilot could see myself, the airframe guy, and the pilot's mate. Had to see the 3 of us in case something went wrong. And he'd just point you and you'd jump up on the wing and try and understand what he was trying to tell you, which happened quite often. You'd do a little snag and you'd fix it up. Then they'd line her up on the catapult, and off she'd go. And then you'd see them go low. Very exciting to watch.
Some of the photographs I've seen, you see the aircraft as it leaves the deck, it drops and comes up.
Yeah,
And pilots always said that was the most dangerous part
it
of
is, yeah. We used to steam into wind, and we used to have a steamer jet up on the middle of the flight deck. Now, we always had the speed up because we had to have 21 knots over the flight deck for the aircraft speed. The jet more or less indicated that the wind hadn't changed across the direction of the aircraft carrier, even though, you think the other ones are telling the direction. That was there. And nearly every time, the jets, you'd see them go down, you could see the jet efflux actually on the water. To stir the water up then out on the aircraft.
Incredible. Now, with the aircraft that were taking off, you said you were assigned to 2 aircraft, so
Yep.
you would have known those crews.
Yes, get to know them. Yeah, you've never gone to the beer with them.
Yeah. Where an aircraft was ever late coming back or things like that, can you talk about the apprehension you would have felt as part of the crew?
Well, fortunately we didn't have any of those. One of the other squadrons had one. The aircraft was running late. I'm not too sure what it was, whether it was due to a sortie being extended or not. But it does, you get to feel for you're a group.
Mm.
You've been working together for several years. We'd been together for 18 months, all of us, the pilots, the engineers, even the cooks, we're all one big team.
Yeah. The other thing I think a lot of people don't understand is, especially with jet aircraft, it was such new technology that crashes were, training accidents.
We had unfortunately 2 or 3 and lost some pilots, yeah.
And they were crew that you understood,
Yeah.
you worked with.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew 'em.
Yeah. With the, in that part of your world and these aircraft, they'd be taking off, did you ever know where they were going off to or what they were
No,
doing?
all we knew that they were going into they'd be doing a rocket run or a bombing run, and that they were going into the Malayan jungle and against the MRLA. The MRLA was during the Second World War, the British government trained the Malayan anti-Japanese army. And at the end of the war, they'd actually stashed a lot of guns away. Then they formed themselves in the Malayan Race Liberation Army, which became the military arm of the Communist Party.
Yep.
And they're the guys that actually caused all the aggression from about 1948 onwards.
Because there was also a very strong Chinese influence
Yep.
within the Malayan Communist Party.
Yeah.
And at that time, and I can remember reading where it talked about it was all up around the border regions, right down and into the cities themselves. Yeah. So your jets would go off and do bombing runs and then come back.
Mainly our roles were flying sorties, and the ships were doing intercepts on bringing in supplies, those sorts of things, and also they got involved in communications. But we mainly flew sorties into areas where they were as a nominated hub of the MRLA.
Yep. One of the other problems you hear or you people talk about with the pilots and bombing runs is that they go out deliver the load, but never really knew the effect of what was happening. People on ships would say, yeah, we saw planes go, come back, but really didn't understand what was happening in the whole theatre. What did you know about the Malayan emergency from the period you're in?
Well, Malayan emergency started in 1948 when they killed a couple of mining managers, because in those days the British finance company was very heavily involved in the mines, the tin mines and the rubber plantations. And then when the aggression started in 1948, it escalated. And the reason why it was called emergency, because Lloyd's of London didn't want it classed as a war because of the insurance coverage, which is logical when you think of it nowadays, and just continued as emergency. But it really was a war, because there was something like, I think there was 1,000 Malayan military people were killed, with 500 British personnel killed, and I think there were 800 missing in action. So where they called an emergency is a bit of a misnomer to a certain extent, but they only called it that because of that deal. But it was basically a communist threat, as they saw.
Yeah, because even though it officially finished, I think it was around 60, 62, it was deemed over. Australia still had an army company serving there with a RAF squadron at RAF Butterworth.
Yeah.
To my understanding, I think they were still there, but they were certainly there in the mid-2000s.
Yeah, Butterworth was Penang, on the island of Penang. That was going for many, many years afterwards. And there was a regiment of Australian Army in there for a while, but I can't remember what date they came out.
When you came back, you then were discharged from the Navy. How did you settle back into normal life?
It's a good question, because when you come back, if you've been, like I was away I joined and I only did the 5 years, and I was invalided out, but at that time you lose contact with all your friends, even though you're still writing them cards, and when you come home every now and then you go to a few beers and you're in the pub. When you get out, you find that you don't have anything really common to talk about, and that's really a problem. It'd be no good me saying, oh, what were you doing 6 months ago? Well, I was in Gibraltar. And you're talking to a guy who hasn't been past Seymour. So you learn very quickly not to say what you've done. But you have lost your circle of friends because they're all married and they've got kids, and you find you've got very little in common. You really have to start your life again, socially.
Because that's one of the things that, again, a lot of servicemen have said, that when they have been discharged, they leave what's been an extremely supportive family.
Yep.
And then you're back, and then, as you say, you're an outsider, even though you're within your family and you're within your old friend base.
Yeah, very true.
How long do you think it took you to get your head around all that?
Well, I ended up joining TAA when I came out. As I said, I had a whole career, my whole career's been in aviation. I joined TAA and I sort of became friendly with a lot of people there. So my focus of the friends that I knew previously, I'd moved slowly away from those into a new group in the airline industry. Go to the beer with them and go to the football. This continued for many years. And in some ways, I've still got friends with them now. So I actually changed my social communication.
My father had served during the Second World War, and when Vietnam was on, his greatest fear was that his sons would be sent off to Vietnam under a conscription. One of your sons went into the Navy, was still serving, I think?
No, he came out last year actually.
Oh, okay. After 30-something years?
31 years, yeah.
Yep. So you've also had the issue of being a father who's had to see a son go off into those areas. Do you want to talk a little bit about that part of your life?
Well, he was at the stage of his life too. It goes... Excuse me, sorry about this, I've got a damn head cold. He was at a loss when he came into school, a bit like me, couldn't make up his mind. And he was 19 years of age, and my wife and I, we were going overseas. I'd actually been posted over to Bahrain. And I said, well, you make up your mind, are you coming with us? Do you want to get another job? What do you want to do? And he said, I'll join the Navy, Dad. And he did. And I was glad too, because at least he had a focus, we didn't have to worry about him. But he stayed in there and had a good career, finished up as a warrant, senior warrant, had a chance for his commission. He travelled the world, he served up in the Gulf, he was on the, what do they call those, the small raiding pump-up boats they got. The
rigid hull inflatable boats.
Yeah, the ones they actually do intercepts and they go on board. Yeah. And they were doing the searches for rifles, more machine guns and all that sort of stuff, and dope and that. It was pretty hairy, and when they get dialed up, they got all these machine guns and things all hanging on them. Very professional, but he came through it quite well. Saw a bit of action that way. He was in Somalia for a while. But I had no compunction. I think the Navy was a good service, and I think he made a good decision. I never worried about him. I thought the Navy would be supportive. If something happens, it happens.
Because it's interesting that you would have experienced potentially what your father and mother would have experienced.
Yeah.
Which is seeing a child go away.
That's true.
And it's interesting then how you then deal with that. And as you say, if you trust in the training and you trust in the support, it's pretty much all you can do, isn't it?
Yeah. I had no concerns about him being in the service. I thought it was good for him.
Yeah. A lot of the younger people who are going to be watching this video and are going to be doing research and things like that, we're living at probably one of the most dangerous times in our history at the moment. What's your view at the moment with how what the future the young people are going to confront?
Well, from when I was a boy to now, our social environment has changed that dramatically that it's almost unrecognisable. The children of today, the youngsters of today, they don't grow up, they don't have the hardships which we had when we were youngsters. We didn't have a great deal, no matter who you were. Today we have a problem. There's no doubt that the Arab world is, we're not getting together. There's an awful problem there. I don't think anyone knows the answer. The youngsters of today, I think, need to focus more on values than what they do. I know it's hard saying that because there's a lot of good people out there, but I think some of the youngsters nowadays are spoilt by their parents. They don't have the discipline, and quite frankly, I believe in national service. I don't see any problems in sending a youngster away for, 3 months, 4.5 and 6 months, I think, in the early days. I'm not talking about Vietnam national service. And I saw guys who were real wimps come out as real men in 6 months. Like friends of mine, dear, he's changed. So I think socially now we have throughout the world now we have major problems. I don't think anyone knows the answers, but they are not getting any better. Every country in the world now has an issue, except Australia, thank goodness.
I think one of the things about national service in the 1960s compared to the 50s national service was you did your 6 months or so, you did I think it was 5 or 6 years in the reserve, or the CMF. What made Vietnam so controversial about it though is they said, right, by the luck of a marble, you're going to Vietnam. And so the young people were put in harm's way. So there was a process a bit different to what is military training. Like they used to train the militia pre-World War II and things like that. And it was a very selective process. How would you see the national service working if you saw it? Would you see the 60s model or the 50s model, which is more about training?
I think the earlier model really, the marble out of a barrel, I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's not exactly clever. It's not exactly clever. You're not picking the best people. You're not picking the people who would like to go overseas. And then you marginalise other people. I don't know what the answer is.
We're coming towards the end of the interview and that. You've played a prominent role in us getting our War Memorial. What's the message you give to the young people about the requirement for remembrance?
Well, that is one good thing I am delighted to see. There is an increase in younger people coming along to memorials, and I think that they must keep in the back of their mind that Australia is free, and why they are free is because many, many years ago people made a big commitment, and we must never ever forget the commitment going back to the First World War that our predecessors have gone through. But I must admit I'm delighted that young people come along, and anyone watching this, come along to Anzac Day, and if you can, Remembrance Day as well, and buy your poppy and buy your badge. Support the veterans.
Thanks very much, John. It's been a pleasure.